Hi folks, welcome back to my channel. Today I've got a free pattern to share with you. This is our garter stitch mitts pattern. It's perfect for new knitters. If you already know how to cast on, work the knit stitch and bind off, then this pattern is a great way to increase your skills. You can learn how to work short rows in garter stitch and how to seam your finished project. You can download your free pattern on our website, zolda.com, and on Ravelry. I've put a link in the show notes below so you can get your free pattern. And the pattern includes sizes from a little kid size that will fit sort of toddlers, preschoolers, up to an adult large. So you've got sizes to fit anyone you're knitting for. And I find these mitts are perfect if you're typing in a cold office or you're working in the garden, anywhere where you want to be able to use your fingers if you're knitting outside. They're also a really great stitch buster. They use between 60 and 200 meters of DK weight yarn. So they're perfect for leftovers, definitely a one skein project. As you can see here, the garter stitch mitts are worked sideways. So you cast on sort of along your hand and wrist and then knit around the hand, and the shaping is all worked with short rows. So see my short row turns here, which make the wrist narrower for a nice snug fit. They will stay on easily, and then more rapid short rows are worked here to create this sort of wedge or triangle shape for the thumb. In almost the same way as the short rows, when you come to the thumb you will stop knitting here and turn back, and then these stitches are just left hanging out on the needle. It's really simple. And then when that thumb shaping is complete, you'll kind of fold the little wedge you've made up on itself and start knitting across all of your stitches again to create the thumb opening. If you are a more advanced knitter, you could also choose to work a provisional cast on. My favorite method is the crochet provisional cast on, and we do have a video that I'll link to for that method. And then at the end you can undo your provisional cast on and graft your live stitches together. So I'll show you that option as well, and that might be something where you want to maybe make one pair with the kind of regular cast on and bind off, and then for your second pair maybe you want to increase your skills and do that provisional cast on and grafting for a completely seamless finish. You can see here you can't even tell where that seam was. You will need between 60 and 200 meters of DK weight yarn and a 3.75 millimeter needle, or the needle size that you need to obtain the gauge given in the pattern. You can also use straight needles. This project is worked flat. I just happen to prefer working flat on circular needles. And you'll need one stitch marker. I've also got a removable stitch marker here, which is helpful for marking the right side of your fabric. You can also use a safety pin, scissors, and a darning needle for seaming together. If you want to start with a provisional cast on, you will also need a crochet hook and waste yarn to work the provisional cast on. I've worked my cast on and initial rows. I used a long tail cast on here, which is my favorite sort of general purpose cast on. But if you prefer something like a cable cast on or a knitted on cast on, those would be absolutely fine. And you can also, of course, work a provisional cast on here rather than a regular cast on. So I've worked my initial rows, and on this row before beginning, the pattern says to put a safety pin or a removable marker on the right side. So on this row, when I'm ready to begin this row, I've got it on my left needle, the yarn near the needle tip. The stitches facing me are going to be the right side of the work. So I can just put my marker into a stitch there, doesn't really matter where, and then I'll know that anytime I'm looking at my fabric, if that marker is visible, then the right side is facing me. If that marker is not as visible, it's on the other side, then I'm on the wrong side. On this row, we're going to put in our stitch marker and work our first wrap and turn. So I'll show you how to work the wrap and turn now. I'm ready to work the wrap and turn of my short row. I've knit to the marker, so I'm going to slip the marker onto the right needle tip. Then I'm going to keep the yarn at the back for the moment and slip this next stitch. So slip it purlwise by inserting the right needle tip from the right to the left, the front of that stitch, and then slip it off the left needle. Then turn the work and bring the yarn in between the needles to the back. And now we're going to slip that stitch again. We never work it on this row. So again, slip it purlwise. And then slip the marker. And now knit the next stitch, snugging it up so that your wrap isn't too loose. And now knit to the end of the row. On the following row, when you get to the marker, slip the marker, and then we're going to knit this wrapped stitch. You can see the little wrap, it's got like a little scarf around the bottom of it, and we're not going to pick that up. If you're doing short rows in stockinette or maybe in garter stitch in a finer yarn, you might want to pick that loop up, that wrap up, and knit it together with the stitch, but the wraps blend really well into the bumps of the garter stitch. So on this pattern, you're just going to knit the stitch and leave the wrap sitting around the bottom of it. And then continue to the end of the row. The thumb is also shaped with short rows, and to create this opening here, we're going to work several rows on these stitches from here to here without working the stitches here. And we'll create the sort of hole by then folding this piece and rejoining all of our stitches to work across. So I'm on the second row of my thumb section, and I've knit to several stitches before the end. The exact number is in the pattern. I'm making the adult small, so I've got 10 stitches left. And then I'm not going to do a wrap and turn because I specifically don't want to connect these shorter rows to the lower row here, as I do when I'm doing my sort of wedge short rows. I want a gap. So I'm going to turn the work and just leave these stitches hanging out on the needle, and then I'm going to knit to 3 stitches before the marker. There we go, it's 3. And do a wrap and turn. This is just the same as the wrap and turns you've already done to sort of shape the wrist. And now I'm on the wrong side again, and I'm going to knit to the gap I created on my last wrong side row. Should be quite obvious when you get to the end of that. You've got quite a visible jump here. So totally ignoring those stitches, you turn, and then on this short row, I'm working to 3 stitches before the wrapped stitch. And do double check the pattern for the exact numbers for your size. And sort of see a little gap here. And then if you look really closely, you can see the wrap around this stitch. So that's the wrap stitch. So then 3 stitches before it is 1, 2, 3. So we're not counting the wrap stitch. And then I'm going to wrap this next stitch. And that gives me a wrapped stitch with 2 plain stitches in between, and then another wrapped stitch. You're going to continue to repeat that the number of times given in the pattern for your size. And on this row, I'm going to work all the way to the end, so right to the end of the cuff. And just as we have done on all the other short rows, when I get to the wraps, here's a wrapped stitch, I'm just going to ignore those and I'm going to knit that stitch normally. Wrap stitch. So you can see that's given me a sort of wedge for the first half of the thumb. And now I'm going to knit a few plain rows, which will be at the center of the thumb. Again, only going to the thumb stitches before I turn. We're still leaving these stitches here just to hang out on the needle, and then I will mirror that short row shaping for the other half of the thumb. Completed the thumb shaping, and I'm on the wrong side row where I'm going to rejoin my stitches I was working during the thumb shaping with the stitches I sort of left on hold here. So I'm just going to knit to the end of the thumb stitches, and then I want to allow this sort of wedge shaped section here for the thumb to fold on its back on itself like this, so that I can knit the next stitch and just give the yarn a nice tug both before and after knitting that stitch, just to make sure that your stitches where that joins aren't too loose, and then continue knitting to the end of that row. Pop it out the other way. This is actually the right side, so you can see that's created our little opening for the thumb. Okay, stick your thumb through there, and where I knit across there, I've kind of smoothly joined that, so we've got this little bridge that goes around the knuckles and a hole for the thumb. And then the rest of the knitting just uses the same techniques. You're basically just repeating these initial short row wedges to create the second half of the mitt. If you began with a cast on edge and finished with a bind off edge, your completed mitt should look something like this. You can see the thumb in the middle. So to seam it, we're going to work the seam from the wrong side. So with the bound off edge at the top and the sort of wider edge, the palm edge on the right, then that's the right side facing up. To work the seam from the wrong side, I'm going to fold these sort of right side halves together like this, and then you want to hold it so that you've got your end where your yarn's attached on the right. Got a nice long tail from my bind off. You want that tail to be at least 3 times the width, and then we're going to do a whip stitch or an overcast stitch to join this. On the bind off edge, you can see you've got clear sort of V's for each chain. You're going to go under both legs of that chain. On the cast on edge, you don't have quite such a clear chain, and you can go through just one loop here. So I'm going to start through one loop on the cast on edge, and then under both legs of my bind off stitch. And after each stitch, I'm pulling the yarn through. My tail's probably a bit excessively long here, but I'm not pulling it like super tight, just kind of snugging it up against the stitches. At the end of the seam, you can weave in both loose ends and then turn it to the right side, and it should look something like this. It's not completely invisible, but I find this seaming method lays nice and flat and is comfortable to wear. I've got a mitt that I started with a provisional cast on here, and I'm going to undo the provisional cast on and return those cast on stitches to the needles so that I can graft or Kitchener stitch the two ends together. So I haven't bound off, I've still got my live stitches on the needle, and my last row worked was a right side row, so my yarn is at the opposite side to my starting tail and my kind of end chain of my crochet provisional cast on. So I'm going to undo that initial chain and then place the resulting live stitches onto the other tip of my circular needle. If you're working with straight needles, you'll just use your second needle for this. So I'm pulling out one stitch at a time and placing the stitch in my working yarn onto the needle. If you've done Kitchener stitch before on stockinette fabric, it's the same principle for garter stitch, but your order that you put the needle into the stitches is slightly different so that you maintain the kind of striped pattern of bumps and valleys that the garter stitch has. So the first step is to go into the first stitch on the front needle purlwise, leave it on the needle, and then go into the first stitch on the back needle knitwise and drop it off the needle, and then into the first stitch on the back needle purlwise and leave it on the front needle knitwise and off, and then the next stitch on the front needle purlwise and keep it on. And so on both needles you're always doing that sequence of purlwise and leave the stitch on the needle, and then knitwise on the other needle and the stitch comes up. Then purlwise and stays on, knitwise off, purlwise on. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I'm Isolde. You can find me on Instagram as Isolde, of course on YouTube, and my website is isolde.com. You can also find all of my patterns and ebooks on Ravelry. And I regularly share tutorials for all skill levels and free patterns here on YouTube, so don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and do let me know in the comments down below how you got on with this tutorial or if you have any questions.